Welcome back, everyone. This is part 3 of our converse series, Black Women in the Workplace. And today's or this part's topic is accountability to her, where we will explore what does it mean to be accountable and what does it mean for an organization and a manager to be accountable to Black women in the workplace. I am Rashana Roach, the CEO and founder of Vocal Action LLC, and I am joined today by some of my favorites, two of my favorites. We have Deborah Harper, Esquire. We love that. We love that. And we have Tracy Allen. I'm going to say Ellen. I'm sorry. Tracy Allen, who is a licensed clinical social worker. During your introduction, please let me know what the C means. And she has her own restorative practice that is located in Baltimore. So welcome, ladies. I'm so happy to have you all joining today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. So Deborah, why don't you go first and let us know a little bit more about yourself?
Okay, well, I am a relatively recent transplant to the DMV area from New York City. And I am a licensed attorney and also a social worker. And currently, I am a program manager for the District of Columbia at the Department of Human Services, where I oversee a program that works with youth who are running away in the District of Columbia, working with them, providing case management services and all the other ancillary services to the young person and their family to hopefully prevent them from running away in the future.
Thank you. Tracy, tell the people who you are.
Hello, I'm Tracy Allen, owner of Reclaiming Hope LLC, which is a private practice where I do group, family, and individual therapy. I'm a former manager with DC government. I was in 2 agencies, one with juvenile offenders and the other one with juveniles who had gotten into trouble and were being diverted to avoid, the further end of the spectrum. It was a diversion program. I transitioned from there in 2018 to start my practice, and that's what I'm doing currently.
Awesome. And if you do not mind telling us what the C is for, because
it's licensed certified social worker clinical.
Oh.
So the C at the end identifies the clinical. You'll see some that just say LCSW, and they are certified social workers at the master's level, but their background isn't clinical. The hyphen C is clinical.
Okay. Are there different types of, like, if you're not clinical, is there another letter that you could get, or
just the LCSW?
Okay.
So it'll say LCSW, but it won't have the hyphen C.
Okay. So for those of you all watching, I butchered it. I'm sorry. So you are a licensed certified social worker, clinical.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Thank you so much for that correction. I want to make sure that I get it correct. So as I said, this is part 3 of our converse series of Black Women in the Workplace. We started with part 1 with Dr. India Jackson and Kenya, where we talked about the history of Black women in labor. Then we had the future Dr. Victoria Davis in part 2, talking about how that history impacts our health and wellness, how we show up in the workplace, and things for us to consider as we're showing up into the workplace. And here we are in part 3, as I said, talking about now how those workplaces can support us understanding our history and its impact. So the first question that I have for you ladies, I love to start with defining terms. And I would like for you all to let me know, what does it mean for an organization or an agency to be accountable to Black women?
Okay, well, I think when an organization is accountable, in general, it's saying that you're not just an employer. You should have a sense of responsibility for all of your employees, to their professional development, to their well-being while in the workplace, and to the services or products, depending on what type of organization you have, making sure that all of those things are of a standard that you can be proud of. As far as with regards to accountable to Black women in the workplace, I think it's about not stereotyping Black women in the workplace. Black women should be able to speak their minds without having some of the negative attributes bestowed upon us. We should be encouraged to pursue higher levels within the organization. There should not be a glass ceiling. And we should, organizations should allow women, Black women, to be free to express themselves. You know, I worked in a place in New York City that I was quite impressed with. There was a large percentage of staff who were from Africa, and the women would come in with their beautiful African attire, and it was just like so welcome. And, you know, eventually I was wearing some of mine, you know, to the office, and you just felt good coming into the office dressed in your African attire. And it was welcomed. And I think that that's the way that it should be. You shouldn't be, you know, given the side eye because you wear your hair a certain way or you dress a certain way. So those are the things that I think organizations should be more accommodating to, just as they are with other ethnicities.
So for me, I put accountability and equality together. And I say that because I've noticed that, you know, coming into a place new, because I was new in both agencies that I worked in. And while one agency, the upper management were a bunch of, you know, well-educated Black women, I was initially received well until they realized that I was outspoken. Like, I'm going to tell the truth. I'm not going to mask anything. I'm not going to lie about anything. And then that's when I become a problem. And that is always odd to me, that I'm working with women of color who, Black women who, you know, have made it. You know, you're in these positions where, you know, it's a qualified position. You have essentially power, and you're downing another Black woman because they choose not to go with the status quo. And then I come into another agency as, you know, basically the newbie, and everybody's been there, and there's all of these friendships and relationships. And I find that that second agency was all about feelings. Everything was about feelings and relationships. And that drove me crazy coming in the door, because I had 3 interviews because people felt like I was mean, or you know, all of these feelings, but can you do the job? So, you know, be equal. Did we go through this with everybody else here? Like, was this a thing for everybody else? Um, that whole favoritism thing, because all of the other people have already been here and I'm the new person. So my opinion doesn't weigh as much as everyone else's. And then when I speak up about it, I'm the angry Black woman. So it's like, let me be equal. If you hired me to do a job and we're all a team, how is it that my opinion doesn't matter as much as everybody else's? So, you know, in addition to what Deborah said, I feel like equality is the next big thing. Like, I feel like they're equal. They're on the same platform. Like, one isn't any greater than the other, because uh, trying to hold me accountable or hold someone accountable in an agency where things aren't equal is pointless. Nothing's ever going to get resolved.
Yeah, you all both bring up some themes that we've shared in part 1 and part 2. In part 1, you know, when we talk about the history of Black women in labor, we go back to slavery, because we define Black as being Black in America, and primarily, even in that definition, primarily speaking about being African American. And understanding how Black women's bodies, you know, were literally used for the purpose of labor. Not just, working the land and working the homes and things like that, but literally our bodies, right, were used to produce more slaves and things. And so when you think about that, and then how that then transitioned into where we are today, there are some places when we talk about the workplace, and especially in a capitalistic society, where it's somewhat of an expectation, right? Or maybe it's not an expectation. You all can correct me if I'm wrong, but that we're supposed to almost still put our bodies on the line, however that is, which prevents acceptance in terms of how we want to show up, prevents us from showing up sometimes as our full authentic selves, because there's already this mold of what they think we're supposed to be. They meaning whoever's management, society, white people, what have you. And then also that limits equality, right? Because I now have to fit this mold, while there are other people that are not Black women may not have to fit that mold. And so I wanted to ask you a question, actually, Tracy, because you mentioned that, and I know that you've started your own practice. Is what were their experiences in terms of you transitioning from, being an employee to then being a manager, that are influencing how you are now running your own business?
So the main thing for me now is that I don't desire to work back in the government system. I find that when I think I was in Maryland state government for years before I transitioned to DC government, and I found that I was always trying to work to prove myself, or if I wasn't working to prove myself, I was the token Black girl. So you needed my experience, but I know I was only there to serve a purpose of saying that we have a diversified staff. So it's one of those things now where it's left a sour taste in my mouth to work in government or in any other bureaucracy, for lack of a better word. I can't do it. And and even for me, looking to, if I chose to hire somebody, I'm hiring young ladies that are coming out of college that look like me, that have gone to an HBCU, because I feel like they need the chance. I want you to get a chance to be expressive, be able to communicate how you feel, be able to speak up if something doesn't sit right, but know how to articulate yourself effectively, and don't be afraid to do that. I was almost like the rebel, where coming from where I was, it's like, I always had something to say because I don't agree. I don't agree. I'm sorry. I feel like there are way too many opinions about people who look like me, and you're making decisions from behind the desk. Have you gone out to see what's going on? Do you know what these homes look like? Do you know what the circumstances are? You haven't done anything. So I don't feel like you can effectively, make decisions about people that look like me. And then when I speak up, I'm the rebel. Like, I always have something to say, or I'm not a part of the team because I don't agree. So for me now, it's just, I'd rather figure it out doing it myself than to go like, this woman has bullied me the entire time that I've been here. So now I'm finally with people that look like me. And that was the worst experience I've ever had. So, for me now, it's about empowering young women who look like me. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Deborah, how do you, as you have also been a manager for several years in different cities and states, how, from your perspective, like, how does an organization, or let me ask you this first. Have you ever worked in a place that was inviting and welcoming and would accept what, like, the woman that Tracy is describing as she is, as the women that she is recruiting for her practice? And I would even say that, many Black women may feel they are coming into the workplace. We do have voices. We want to be heard. We have expertise that lends itself to bettering the agency, bettering the company, bettering the program. How have you ever been in a situation or in a job where that you feel like they did it right, And if so, what did they do that was right?
I would say that I have, but that's few and far between.
Mm.
Because more often than not, you have the situation that Tracy described. And like Tracy, I'm very outspoken. Like Tracy, I would push the envelope and not accept the status quo. If you see the status quo is not right, let's fix it.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks, what I found um, is not so much that they don't want the change, but within them, they're afraid. They're afraid to ruffle feathers. They're afraid to lose their job or be looked at in a certain way. So they just want you to be quiet, even though they might agree with you. And that's very, very frustrating because
Mm.
if you're looking to your supervisor or manager to advocate on your behalf, and they're like constantly telling you to hush, oh, not right now, wait, maybe a couple of months down the road or whatever, that becomes very very frustrating, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not a good feeling. So I've definitely experienced that a lot more than the other. But I would say that in my first real supervisory job after graduate school, I did have a really terrific supervisor. She was a white woman, and she taught me how it's okay for supervisors to um, be open and personable with their staff and to care about their staff.
Mm.
And one of the things that she did, I never forgot, because it said so much. Um, we were experiencing some kind of a blackout in the building with the electrical, so the air conditioning was out, and it was hot. People, were fanning themselves and doing everything to try and keep cool. She left the building and she came back with a shopping cart. She didn't drive. She came back with a shopping cart that she had taken to the area supermarket, which was several blocks away. And she bought up all of the ices and ice pops that she could fit into a shopping cart and brought it back to the staff. And that said something to all of the staff. She couldn't fix the air conditioning, but she could do something that showed that she felt our pain, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I think I took with me in every position that I had after that. Caring about people, um, not wanting people to deal with something that I wouldn't deal with myself. Um, Understanding what motivates people, because as a manager, if you understand what motivates your staff, you'll be able to get your task achieved a lot easier. If I know that this person is motivated by X, I'm going to try to make sure that they have X around, and whatever the case may be. So yeah, so I've had good managers, few and far between, but I'm thankful that I did have a good manager for my first manager out of graduate school.
Yeah, I want to build off of something you said, because you're talking about the manager, right? And we started this conversation talking about the organization. So do you feel like, is it possible to be a good manager? And when we say good, we mean one that is accountable to Black women, as we defined when we started this conversation. Is it possible to be a good manager if you are in an organization that does not support Black women? And another way of framing that is, does the change come from the manager and like up and out, or does the change have to start with the organization?
So for me, it seems like, okay, both of my teams and both agencies where I was, my teams were thriving. I encouraged us to operate like a family. I supported them. They supported me. I was very overprotective of them. Even if they had done something wrong, I never let the upper management come down on my staff. Like I would, I was the buffer always, and that's the way I wanted it to be. Um, but I found that having that rapport with my staff and all of the staff per se, because a lot of staff that weren't under me would still come to me. I got penalized for being the manager that everybody liked. It was, well, it was almost like, well, why does everybody go to her? Why is maybe she's too friendly with them? No, I treat people like human beings. I can remember an instance where it was a staff who was labeled as a problem employee. She had come back to work and instantly got a write up. Now there wasn't a lot of follow up, but there was more frustration with her lack of um work than what was actually going on with her. So prior to that write up, I pulled her up myself. She wasn't on my team. And I just asked her, I said, how are you? Like, what's going on? How are you? She broke down crying. And the first thing she said was, nobody ever asked me, was I okay? Nobody ever said, was something going on? And after we had that conversation, there was a small shift, in the way in her performance. I just feel like for me, treating people how, you would want to be treated, that's always worked for me. Not only that, my background is EAP. I see how managers cause so many problems or have caused so many problems just by being caught up in a title. I don't care about that. I
EAP.
can employee assistance program. So that's your wellness program. That's your counseling for your staff, where you can go and call HR and say, look, I'm having an issue with this employee. They're using substances. They need some help. Or, going as an employee, you can call and say, I lost a parent. I'm depressed. It is affecting my job. So now I need some help. So most jobs now offer EAP services. That's what my background is. And that's what I was trained in. So that puts a different spin on how I view things. And then I am a people person when it comes to health. So, and I'm not above getting my hands dirty. I've never been that way. I can remember being 15 working at Foot Locker, and I never understood why my supervisor act like he couldn't sell shoes. He would stand around and bark out orders all day long. But I'm like, why can't you do what we're doing? That never made sense to me. Like, why can't you fold the shirts? We have to fold the shirts. Why can't you fold the shirts? Like, are you above doing what we're doing? So I took that. I always held on to that. But I found that it got me penalized because at both agencies, staff across the agency and other buildings would call me or try to consult with me about stuff or make it known and say, I wish you were my supervisor. Everybody knew that. But in the end, it backfired on me because people were just like, oh, well, who does she think she is? Or, why is everybody so fond of her? But it's just who I am. So the accountability part of it is, does management encourage fostering relationships, like management above me? Or are you sitting around pacifying those people who are whining about everybody goes to her? And I found that I got more of the pacifying of the people who were whining versus making the environment inclusive. It was a divide. Like everything was divided. It was my team, and then it was somebody else's team and somebody else's team. And then it was, this person's area. We were not like a family, considering we were one division. And I think that's odd that the division is there and people allow it to be so divisive. And then all of the Black women feel the same way, like they have no voice.
So it sounds like from what you're saying that as a manager, there's things that you can do with your team, right? So like there's ways that you can individually uplift Black women that are on your team, but ultimately there is possibly a hefty price to that if the organization does not support that. Anybody want to talk about, like, I mean, you talked about it, but it's like, I'm just thinking of how, the last part we talked about Black women's health and wellness, and we talked about just like how, we're navigating the workplace as Black people, and we're also navigating the workplace as women, and how just, like you said, you asked that team member how they were doing. That just seems like a heavy place to be, when you are trying to make change and you are seeing change. and you are doing something that is uplifting, and you don't have the organization or company support, like that, how does a manager push through that?
I think that sometimes you get into that role by choice, and sometimes you get into that role by default of being the manager people feel comfortable coming to with their issues. If you're working in an environment that is toxic, it might happen by default because people are just looking for that new person to bend their ear and tell them what's going on, please help me. And if you are the type of manager that not going to play into the toxic environment, you will be someone by default that people will come to. And then there are times when you're in that role, you know, in a purposeful way. I've worked with managers who are not as comfortable as I am with engaging with staff and so forth. And I've always been a manager. Think I've just about always worked on the same floor with the majority of my staff. And I'll circle the entire floor in the morning, at some point in the afternoon, and at some point at the end of the day, just, stopping by folks' cubicles or office, what's going on? Hey, how you doing? Chatting it up about whatever, how was your weekend? How's your kids? Who's that a picture of on your desk, or whatever the case may be, just to lighten the moment, to let folks know that there is, a manager, around, that you can talk to. I think that as Black women managers, we might many a time fall into a nurturing role for some of our staff, and I don't have a problem with that. If that's a role that's needed in the workplace for a particular reason, so be it. I think that when we purposely put ourselves out there, we should know that, what the possible blowback might be. But in many instances for me, because my managers might not feel comfortable in that role, it's been okay. And where it hasn't is when I start to push issues that are coming up over and over again. This seems to be a problem bubbling over here. I think you need to look at this. And when it's not addressed, that can be frustrating. And I have been in positions where I've said I have to take a step back because I have to, clear my head of some of the junk that's going on in the office, just keep my sanity. So you take a step back for a little while, because like you said, it is a very heavy, can be a very heavy situation. But I think that it's important for experienced Black women managers to know that young and upcoming Black managers are looking at you. They're following what you're doing and how you deal with situations. And you have an opportunity to teach the next generation about how to be a good manager. And I'm very purposeful about that with the supervisors who are under me. And things will come up like during this whole COVID pandemic. And how we've been working, teleworking, and things that have come up and so forth. I'm very clear in terms of where I stand on certain things, and I'll let the supervisors under me know exactly what my position is and how I'm trying to strategize, getting from point A to point B, just, be patient, watch what I do. And this is why I'm doing it, because I'm very intentional about teaching new leadership or future leadership about the ways that have been successful for me. And I think that that's very important, because I've also experienced what you were saying earlier, Tracy, about working with Black managers who weren't about showing the way. And I experienced that. And it was kind of like, oh, wow, um, they're not taking me under their wing. Gee, I thought that they were
Right.
like, oh, here's this new graduate, student, and she's going to be going into management and so forth. Let me show her what I learned along the way. And it was kind of surprising that that wasn't what feedback I got from that experience. But it has also made me even more intentional about being that for other young Black women and young Black men too. I mean,
Mhm.
because unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of Black men in management positions in our fields where young Black men coming up can obtain mentorship relationships.
So that's another thing that I foster. I'm an adjunct professor at Morgan, and I make sure that I tell my students all the time, they're like, well, Professor Allen, I want to make sure. And I'm like, no, I want you to be better than me. Even with my interns, I am grooming you to be better than I am, be more creative than I am, because the people are going to need you, after me. When I'm gone, what trend have I taught you to continue going? And that's the thing that's the most important to me. um, I can remember having a situation at work and going to another manager who, was above me, because one of my team members was talking about me, and it had gotten back to me, and I was on fire. And I had gone to her, and it was early in the morning. I called her. I don't even think she got a chance to really sit down in her seat good. And I walked in there, and I was upset because I'm like, we're supposed to be a team, and it's like it's me by myself and these other two, and now you're talking about me, and it's gotten back to me. And I was brand new. Like, I hadn't been there that long at all. So I'm just like, I just got in the door. Like, I haven't done anything to anybody. And at that point, I was quiet. Like, a lot of times being new places, I don't say much. Like, I sit and I just observe. I take it all in, and I'm watching, getting to know people, how people respond to stuff, behaviors, that sort of thing. I'm very observant. And I felt cornered already. I'm like, I just got here. But having somebody that I could go to who was willing to listen and work to resolve it, was beneficial. But if I didn't have that person, I wouldn't have had anybody. So a lot of it involved me tracking every single thing that happened. So at a point, I ended up having to go to HR, but I had dates and all of that stuff, because i- if the person who was in charge isn't working to fix the problem just exacerbates. And you don't want to just be the constant complainer. So at a point, you learn to just take it. And that's been the history of Black people. What do? We just take it. In slavery, we just take it. You know, in jobs, we just take it. It's always, we're always being forced to be in a position of, okay, we just got to take it at this point. And I rebel against that, which is why I end up leaving, because I'm like, I'm not gonna just take it. I work too hard to get where I am. I'm giving quality work. I don't have any bad marks in my record about my work performance. My evals are good, but I'm supposed to just take the lack? No.
Yeah. I wonder, and uh, we left off in part two, sort of talking about when you think about these trainings that are coming up, particularly now that we should have had a long time ago, around diversity or racial equity. And they are, I guess, moving past the general cultural competency curriculum, right? And is that just like humanity, that part? And I'm not sure. I feel like organizations are very much more focused on the numbers, right? They're very much more focused on the outcomes. And I completely understand why, right? We all know that data tells a story. It, determines how much revenue you get. It determines how successful your program is seen, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I wonder though, if in the training that managers receive, and even in the training that organizations, I guess, would mandate that a manager receives, rather than training about how to supervise a person into getting, doing the job, or in addition to training a person about or supervising someone so that they can do the job, also training the supervisor to like gauge that person. Does that make sense? Like in that emotional intelligence, like I feel like that part about just how to work with people is missing, which is why these marks are missed, in my opinion. Because I think about, like, in your situation, Tracy, where you're talking about, you went to a manager, there was someone on your team that was saying something about you, right? Why was that not bothersome to that manager, right? And it might be because there wasn't a direct correlation between that and getting the job done, right? Like, you know what I mean? And the numbers. Mm-hmm. And so I'm often trying to figure out, like, to me, that's the basic level of like managing, because you're working with people. And I'm just trying to figure out like why that seems like it's missed. Like I'm not sure. And you guys may not have an answer, but it's just a comment. And another example that I gave was, right now or last year, if let's remove the pandemic. If, Black women and Black men, but if we had to attend work, which we have done in years past, with everything racially that happened last year, right? And we do, right? So we've done that mm-hmm. before. But I also just wonder how it just seemed back to back to back to back, which sometimes it does. But then to end the year, or was it the beginning of the year? I can't remember now, with like an insurrection, a terrorist attack. I think about how many people I saw worked in places, but because of the pandemic, and have expressed, when people are actually going into the office, how deaf their agency feels on that, or their agency responds or doesn't understand if I need a break or anything. And it just reminds me, it just feels like, I don't know if entities and managers are trained on like just regular people skills,
I mean, training has its limitations. All right. Okay. We can't really train people how to be decent human beings.
Yes.
If people look to training to eradicate racism, they're wasting their time. In my opinion, people have to themselves want to rid themselves of racism and biases, if they're going to make a change in that area. Taking someone who has racist, bias inclinations, putting them in a training, they might just be sitting in the training like, I don't believe this nonsense. I don't, why am I sitting here? So that's not the way to get at it, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think that people just have to be drawn, you know, that compassion, that empathy has to be drawn out in some other way. I think that what happened with Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, those incidents have helped to do that, because anyone looking at that George Floyd video who isn't brought to tears, um, yeah, maybe you're just totally dead inside. I don't know, but I think that that has helped to bring some level of understanding of systemic racism to people's psyche where it didn't exist before. So I think that it's good that organizations are recognizing that they need to do something. That's good. But what I think would be better done with just people sitting around and having small group conversations and talking, you know, like put 5 questions on a table and have several tables of 10 people, and you're going to be talking about these racial issues. And I dare say that they need to be tables made up mainly of your white staff. You know, us having all of our Black staff in these trainings around racism, I don't know, it just doesn't, that's not where the issue is to me, you know? So, but again, I'm glad that agencies and organizations are recognizing that they need to do something. So that's a moving the needle a little bit. I just recently picked up my copy of Shirley Chisholm's Unbought and Unbossed, and reading that, it's like so much of what was written in 1970 is so relevant today. And yeah, see, actually, it was when I bought that T-shirt, and I was like, oh, I hadn't read it in I don't know how long, but you know, a book that was written in 1970, everything in it is still relevant today.
Wow.
You know, and you know that shouldn't be the case. You know, the needle should have moved way further by now.
I think another start is trainings around microaggressions and what they look like. Because I think some people are not, and I'll say white people sometimes, you know, they'll say, oh, I have Black friends, or, you know, my partner is Black, or, you know, I only date Black men. And, you know, you have no idea what those microaggressions look like because they've been instilled in you since you were a child. So what you think is nothing can be extremely offensive to somebody else, you know, a Black person in particular, and you have no idea. So I think while agencies are training on emotional intelligence, because that is starting to be a very popular training of how to, you know, gauge your staff and how to get in touch with what these things could potentially look like and what they could mean and all of those things. Let's get to what the real issue is, because what I perceive as disrespect, you could just feel like you're just conveying a message. I had an instance before where I worked in a co-working space, and I rented the room, and I knew that I had this room for hours because I booked the amount of time to have the room. The guy came in and he said, oh, I have the room. I said, no, you don't. And he's like, you know, I booked it. I said, you couldn't have. I said, if they allowed you to book when I booked, then okay. So he was like, well, I'm going to go check. You know, he wasn't rude. But at this point, I'm irritated because why is it that I already said I booked this room? It's, you know, it's mine. You have an error. So he came back and was like, oh, you're good. I know I'm good. Why don't you say I apologize? I apologize. You know, I messed up. And that had me so angry, you know, in that moment, because I'm like, this right here is a microaggression. You don't even realize what you just said. What you were saying to me was, I don't believe you. You know, I'm going to go verify it. And then you're going to, you know, try to pacify me and say, oh, no, you're good. I know I'm good. Why not say I made a mistake? You know, I apologize. That's what I would have done. But, you know, let's start with where the issues lie, because you can't you can sit, 5 white staff in a room with 20 black staff and have a conversation about racism. They're going to be mute. I've watched it happen 1,000 times. They're going to be mute. They have nothing to say. As a student at University of Maryland, we talked about that one time in class. And I was telling them, I said, I can walk down the halls and speak to people. And sometimes people don't even speak back. Or me coming from an HBCU, the expectation is that I can't write. And I remember a girl, a student in the class, she said, I never had that problem. I said, what color are you? And she was red in the face, like red in the face. And I'm like, this is the thing right here. Like, you're never going to have the same problems that I have. You're never going to have the same instances of discrimination that I face. We're not the same. And it's half the time, I could be more qualified than you, run circles around you in intelligence. But the one thing that is going to deter me from getting to where you get is my skin color. Showing up for interviews. Half the time when I would show up for jobs, I have a wig on, a straight wig with maybe a little color or some curls, because I already know that there's this perception about natural hair. But my first day of the actual job, you're going to get all this natural hair that I have because that's who I really am. But why do I have to think like that? Why do I have to think around being discriminated against to show up? I can't show up as my authentic self because that hair is nappy. That's not good enough. But this straight hair is perfect. Nah.
Yeah, I want to ask this question, and it's related, but just really in general, is this where microaggressions, right? And I use the term microaggression as well too, but lately, and I would say lately for me means probably the past 2 years, I have stopped saying the word microaggressions, because I think that for whatever reason, when we say microaggression, they think that it's less racist or it's less offensive. And I'm just like, no, that was racist. Period. You know what I mean? And to your point, it's like, because you don't see it as racist, that's why you didn't apologize. Or maybe you do and you don't care, right? Like there's that. But I think that we have to like call it out, because that example of what you said, that happens so many times where you're just like either you don't get an apology, you don't get any, like you did, like you don't get any type of acknowledgement, or you get some sort of permission, like you had, right? You got some permission to what? To take being like, to take that treatment, and that part is hard, I think, for me to imagine workplaces being able to get beyond that psyche unless you have a leader who really understands racism, whether they are black, white, or of any other race, right? Like, you have to have a leader who's really cognizant of that, and not just knows it, but what's the word? I can't think of the right word, but basically wants to throw up whenever they know it's present, or they even hear it's present. Not even that you've seen it, but you even hear that, right? Because I'm sure, and I know Deborah has also owned her own business as well, where for all of us here, if Vocal Action, when it does grow, it could grow to employ anybody, right? As long as they're committed to positively impacting Black people and communities globally. But if I have someone come to me and just say that, hey, I experienced it, or I think I did, or whatever, that to me is just as big as a sexual harassment claim. And it's like, unless you have an agency where there's something intentional about the leadership and the makeup, the organizational structure and culture that literally defies racism, you know, like it is not tolerated whether it's a microaggression, whether it's an act, bold, insurrection, right? It's crazy to even think that happened. But unless you have an agency that does that, I just don't know if, like Deborah is saying, if training will help. I don't know if conversations will help, because I don't know if white people at this point, while they it's tugging, I don't know if they feel like they want to throw up. Does that make sense?
So from my experience, when I left, I raised every concern that I had. And the feedback that I got was, oh, I was aware. I was working on it on the back end, but I guess I did too little too late.
Mm.
I said, oh, okay. But when, I resigned and HR replied to my resignation, there was immediate shock. The response to HR was, oh, I didn't know you two were in contact. Why? Does that make you look bad?
Mm-hmm.
Because you weren't concerned about how I felt all of this time, and you knew what was happening. You knew it. Mm-hmm. But because HR is now involved, oh, I didn't know you were in communication. Were you supposed to? Mm-hmm. You weren't supposed to. I had to get somebody to defend me outside of where I was, because you wouldn't. And then when I leave, you say, I was working on it on the back end. I guess I did, too little too late. Mm-hmm. That's not an apology. That says to me, all that does is confirm what I told you. You show favoritism. You don't acknowledge people who, are new. They don't matter as much here. And you fostered that environment for people to get away with that. I was very straightforward about how I felt. But you can't tell me, I guess I did too little too late. So I'm being harassed. You know it. And you're letting it happen because one person looks like you and the other person, has built a relationship with you and caters to the way you want to do things. And here I am, the person who doesn't want to go the way you all are going because it's not beneficial. And you'd rather let me go, as a beneficial employee who has a team that are knocking numbers out the box. You rather say, I guess I did too little too late. I guess so.
Yeah, I think that's where Black women are in the workplace right now. I think that was a really good example of something that was said that sometimes we don't hear, but that's exactly what we feel. And personally, I've been feeling like, this thing around allyship. And I've been like struggling with the word, right? Because I feel like an ally, yes, is someone that's like, yay, I got your back. We're here, right? But I want to move people in organizations from allyship to like advocacy, like radical advocacy. And I know that even that's a process, but that is like, that is actually, that's the practice of vocal action, right? It's like the vocal is like, okay, I've said it, I've acknowledged it, but I need you to act on it. Like I want you to feel like you want to throw up, knowing that there's even hearing that there's something in an agency to be able to fix that. And then implementing practices that will prevent that from happening again. Or if you can't prevent, because I'm not sure you can ever like just eradicate it, you know what I mean? But at least put things in place to where they're, it doesn't happen. And if it does, people know that, no, this is how it's going to be handled. You don't feel like it's handled on the back end. You actually feel like you are supported in that. Go ahead, Deborah.
Yeah. Well, one thing I just wanted to say, and I guess it goes to what both of you were saying there, is that the manager also has to be willing to deal with conflict. And
absolutely,
not every manager is. some people will keep putting it to the back burner, like in your case, Tracy, for as long as they can, because to deal with it means that there's going to be like a level of conflict that they do not want to deal with, and just let sleeping dogs lie. And one of the things when I would interview people to be supervisors or managers, I would pose a scenario in terms of a conflict resolution situation to see how that manager would deal with it. And I push the envelope, and what if they still didn't, comply with it? Then what, and then, to see, at what point are you willing to really just like let loose and say, this is what has to happen, and this has to end, or whatever the case may be. But some people are just, well, I talk and we meet and maybe I'll take them out to lunch, and it's like, okay,
Right.
somebody who doesn't want to deal with conflict is not going to be ready to make that executive decision. This has to stop, that has to go, or whatever the case may be. So people have to have that, to me, in their toolbox of management skills to be that advocate for their staff, for their department, or whatever the group is that they're managing, because conflict is going to happen. You can anticipate it. If you're a good manager, you know exactly when or what's going to cause a conflict. And so you just have to have in your arsenal how you're going to deal with it, because if you don't deal with it, the problem becomes even worse. Not dealing with it will exacerbate it to a level that then you have the whole department, in an uproar. So that's what that situation that you're describing, Tracy, sounds like. That manager did not want to deal with conflict. And so as long as they could avoid it, they were going to avoid it.
Do you think?
And it spread like wildfire, because people were talking at this point, and these are other managers talking to staff. So now you have staff involved in management business, and it's like, oh, did you hear this? Well, did you hear that? Well, somebody said this and somebody else said that, and then it's like all of these little pieces to the puzzle are coming out of nowhere, and it's just like, here I am, almost feeling like I'm pinned against the wall, because I can't entertain it from the staff. Like, I can't, I'm hearing what you're saying, but I can't entertain it. I can't keep going to the one person, who's my ear, because at this point, if our supervisor isn't doing anything about it, then what can I do? So it's like, that's the worst space to be in, where you just feel like you are out there kind of floating around by yourself. And that's how I felt. But I'm not willing to say, oh, well, I'll just deal with it. I'm not dealing with it. I will leave. And anything for my peace. I'm sorry, that is the priority at this point in my life. I cannot love a job more than I love myself. It's not happening.
Yeah, so it sounds like we can agree that a manager can only do so much, but if the agency is not intentional about, asking those questions, like Deborah said in an interview about conflict, and maybe companies need to add that to the list of questions, like where you actually have to add a question about some sort of racial tension, or racism / microaggression, whatever, on the interview question, so that you can really screen how people feel about these things. Maybe it's also, I know we don't like trainings, but most people, when you start a job, you have to take some sort of sexual harassment training. Maybe there's also something about a racism training that tells you these are examples, and if this happens, you report it here, and if you report it, this is what happens. This is the process that starts, once it's reported. Because what I have felt, as someone who has not been a manager in like my normal day-to-day career, is you can feel that. You can feel when you have a manager trying to do everything, and when there are agents, and when there's an agency or a company that does not support that. And the same way you can feel it the other way, right? Because if you have an agency that says that we are not going to tolerate racism, right? We are not going to tolerate harassism on any level, right? Even they don't want to say, like, because I mean, there's racial harassment, there's sexual harassment, there's all of these things. So like, if we're not going to tolerate on any level, in any form, shape, or form, then you also know that, because then you have a manager who adheres to that. And so if their manager does not adhere to those things, then they go, right? You see that, like, they're gone. But when you have an agency that does not call it out in that way, then things are allowed to stay. It does fester, and it makes a very difficult place for Black women to work.
Oh, on the flip side of that, you have an agency director who wants to know what the issues are and wants to know why people are fearful of losing their jobs and speaking up and being honest and asks the questions and gets the answers. But once he gets the answers, he leaves it to the people. So there's the agency director, and then there's all these other people, before him. And then those people are the problem people. And so people are saying, well, these are the problems here. When you speak up, you already know there's a bullseye on your head at this point. You can't do anything wrong because, these people are going to be out to get you. So you have this person who genuinely cares about what's going on and changing the culture, but you're not involved enough to know and listen to hear what people are saying and their concerns are, that you have these staff beneath you who are your management team, your upper management team, and people are terrified of them because of how they bully and harass, and you don't fix that. You're saying you want it one way, but you're not involved enough to help change the culture. You're letting them do it. They are your issue. They are your problem. So all the entire time you're losing staff, and you're losing valuable staff, because these are the ones who know their worth and they're not going to stick around for it. But what was the purpose of asking? Because now it's like nobody wants to speak up, because, okay, if I say something, I already know I am on the chopping block. For one reason or another, they're going to get me out of here. And, you're so far removed from everything, but you want to know what the issues are. So it's like, that's kind of pointless as well, to want to know, to ask. And then you have people who are telling you, okay, this is where the problems lie. This is what's going on. And you do nothing about it. So you're equally as a part of the problem. Like, you're not helping. You're leaving people open to be harassed, bullied, fired. And I watched that happen a number of times, which was another reason why I was like, I gotta go. Like, you're trying to make this hard for me. He asked a question as the agency director, but I'm not gonna lie. But because I don't lie, now it's like, oh, you're not a part, you're not doing what we needed you to do. So now you're the problem. No, I'm just not going to lie. Like, I'm not going to make this comfortable for you all while the rest of us are miserable. No.
Yeah. So I think that is the perfect segue, because what you're getting at there is like, what are some things that agencies and managers can do to create a safe and supportive space for Black women? Do either you all want to start on some tips? We can just popcorn, throw it out there. However you all want to do that. What are some things that have to be in place to say that we have a safe and supportive space that is accountable to Black women?
I mean, I can't think of anything in particular. I think that it's on the Black manager, unfortunately.
The Black manager, okay. But can a white manager do it too?
What do you mean?
You said you think it's on the Black manager, so I was wondering, can a white manager also do whatever you're about to say?
I think so. I think,
Okay.
but I mean, yeah, I think so, for some of them anyway.
Okay.
I come into a new work environment. I'm going to be my authentic self.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a pretty personable person. I try to be as fair as possible. Um, I encourage people to be creative, express new ideas, new ways of doing things. And if we have an organization that's welcoming of those kind of new ideas, whether it's from a Black manager or a white manager, then that's all good. I'm not going to come into a new work environment and automatically, like shut down and wait and see what happens.
Right.
I'm gonna be my authentic self. Yes, I am gonna observe the environment. I'm not gonna be oblivious to what's going on around me, but I think that Black women managers should feel free to be their authentic self. And if they're in an environment that is preventing them from being their authentic self, then they should call out that agency or their manager about that. You know, what do you mean? I'm talking too aggressive in the meeting. What exactly do you mean by that? Or whatever the case may be. So I think that manager is going to set the tone so that the other folks in the room will know this manager isn't going to tolerate that. I mean, I remember coming into a position and I had called a meeting, and it was a meeting of supervisors. And the meeting, I guess it was scheduled from 9 to 10, something to that effect. And I guess it was 10 o'clock, and the supervisor closed her notebook, picked it up, with her pen. And I looked and said, where are you going? What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
And she said, meetings from 9 to 10, it's 10 o'clock. And I told her in no uncertain terms, I called this meeting. I will dismiss this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned later that lots of tears followed after that. But it's like, you have to set that tone.
Yeah.
And if you buck back at that, I'm going to deal with you.
Mm-hmm.
And that becomes known. And people have to, Black women, Black men, women in general, because it can happen where men do that to women in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
You have to set the bar for what you're going to accept and what you're not going to accept in the workplace. And I know it's perhaps easier said than done in a lot of instances, but until we all start doing that across the board,
Yeah,
it's going to continue with the status quo.
I agree. That's the intention. That's to set the tone. And I think that's the only way to be accountable. If it's not, I'm in a group with an agency, and we're working on racial equity. And one of the things that I continue to ask in every meeting and hold us accountable to is, if we do not, we have tenants, or some agencies call them codes, rules, whatever, right? If one of those rules or tenants or codes is not that we do not tolerate, racial inequity, injustice, or however you want to word it, if it's not called out, and I say called out, meaning the word race has to be in there. It cannot be, we do not tolerate bad things that happen to people or something, right? Like it cannot be general. If that's not a part of it, the same way we write, we accept people's cultural differences and sexual orientation preferences and things like that. We do not discriminate based on gender, religion, all those things. If we can write that, then we also need to say we do not tolerate this. And unless you write it that way, like you said, if you do not set it up that way, then it leaves room for it to happen and for it not to be dealt with, because there's nothing there to go back on to hold an agency or people accountable to.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. Does anyone have anything that they want to add?
Nope. I just want to say thank you for having me be a part of the conversation. It's one that needs to be had. I'm hoping that, as people watch this, that they, forward it and share and say, oh, look what I saw. Because even if it's something negative, you're still sharing it. So it's still getting out there. And one negative share could be 12 negative shares, but that could turn into 25 positive shares. So as long as the message is getting out there, people just need to see that this is a thing, and it's not a matter of Black women being angry or, we are tired of having to go along with it. We're tired of having to, dumb ourselves down to appease people, or, being labeled as the rebel, or, the angry Black woman. That's old at this point. Enough is enough. I can, if people can say, you know, I see the entitlement, as a white person, I see how our white privilege is. You can openly say that. But as Black people, we can't, justify why we defend ourselves the way we do. Our voices are soulful. They're powerful. We don't come up in passive households with our grandmas and, mamas and big mas. We were not taught to be meek, most of us. That's not who we are as people. When you think about the people who sing and how soulful their voices are, it's power behind our voices. So when we get excited, that's what you're going to hear. That does not equate to threat. Do not perceive our passion as a threat. Like, that's not a fair thing to do. If you can say that, I can see my entitlement, then see my passion, because I want that same privilege where you can respect me as a person, like you want the respect as the person you are.
Yeah, I think that that's what it's really about. It's about respect. Um, I don't think any of us want anything exceptional. We want the same respect that everyone else expects to get. And I hope that more discussions like this happen, because there are many, many Black women managers who don't receive that same kind of support in the workplace. And we have to create that support for each other.
Yep.
And what I appreciate about this conversation is it wasn't necessarily what I expected, but exactly to what you all are saying, it points out that it was a conversation. There was a big part of this conversation that needed to happen, just because I'm talking to two Black women who are managers, right? Like, initially I was thinking, oh, this conversation is about, the workplace and the managers and like what you all represent sort of as authority, and like your responsibility to Black women. And we talked about that, but then there's also this place that further confirms, why Black women in the workplace is necessary, because there are Black women managers who are also in that same exact place, right? And are trying to navigate that and figure that out in the same way. And so I'm really happy to have both of you all on this episode. I hope that we can continue this conversation. And as Tracy said, if there's something that you even disagree with, put it down in the comments. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, write it there, because it's a conversation and you have the right to disagree or make a different point, right? That's a part of the conversation, so we can have that. Everyone does not have to agree, and you may shed light to something that was missed, or it might be an opportunity for someone to respond, to shed light to something that you may have missed. And this conversation is a good example of that. And so thank you, ladies, for
fabulous.
of being a part of part 3, Black women in the workplace, accountability to her. I have enjoyed just listening. I feel like, Oprah, she used to talk about how she used to sit at the foot of Maya Angelou. She says, Maya Angelou. And just, taking all her wisdom. I feel like that is what I had the opportunity today. I do want to shout out the shirt that I'm wearing. It says Trust Black Women. And it's a shirt that has Harriet Tubman, Shirley Chisholm, who we talked about a little bit. We have Nina Simone. I'm sorry, the screen is flipped. So Nina's over here, Shirley's over here. And then we have Coretta Scott King. And at the end of the day, that's the message. That's the message. You have to trust Black women. When we say that we are experiencing something, same when we say trust women, right? You have to trust Black women. When we say that we are experiencing something, trust that it's something that we're experiencing. It's worth acknowledging. It's worth acting on, and it's worth doing something to prevent it from happening again. So thank you. Peace. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I did forget this. There are people who are watching this who are like, I really enjoy listening to Deborah and Tracy, and I would love to connect with them further. How can people contact you if they would like to connect? Tracy. I was going to let Tracy go first because Deborah seems like she needs to think about it.
Well, for me, I am on Instagram and Facebook at Reclaiming Hope LLC. I can also be reached at www.reclaiminghopellc.com.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I only have right now that I can give out as my office email address. That's deborah.harper@dc.gov.
Email her, okay? Send her an email. Send her a calendar invite.
Yes. Get on her book.
Okay. But also, as you are watching this, there will be bios that are available on the website, and also just a brief bio of all the speakers that are involved in each part, so that way you can read more about them and contact them as well. So if you didn't get a chance to write that down, don't worry, just look below in the description and you'll be able to see it. Thank you. Have a good one.
All right.
Bye. Thanks.